I'm Curator of Education, Catherine Veneman. The Blaffer Art Museum presents Best of Summer Arts, which is a series of 3 art-making demonstrations inspired by summer arts workshops, the museum's annual art-making workshop for kids. For this series, we are reprising popular art-making projects that are partly inspired by past museum exhibitions and reimagining some of our favorite art-making activities. For the series, we're scheduling 3 events, and we're inviting you to join us for all of them, or one of them, or 2 of them. On Saturday, August 8th, 15th, and 22nd at 2 p.m., please join us to watch artist Rona Lesser give a 30-minute demonstration. And lesson plans and materials lists will also be available before the workshops on www.blafferartmuseum.org. Today's project is The Mark, which is watercolor and inspired by the past 2019's Rebecca Morris, The Ache of Fright. The subsequent projects will be August 15th. There will be a workshop on symbols, symbolic language, which will be printmaking, and August 22nd, color and form, which will be sculpture. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to introduce now artist and educator Rona Lesser, who has designed the lessons and will guide you through the art making process. Rona will introduce you to everything. She has been an experienced art educator and artist and has taught summer arts. So have fun, and please do let us know what your questions about summer arts are at info@blaffer@uh.edu. Thank you very much.
Hi, are we ready for me? I hope so. So as Catherine said, the lesson is inspired by Rebecca Morris's Ache of the Bright, and she painted in oils, but her oil paintings reminded me a whole lot of working with watercolor because of the textures and the layers she used, and that she thinned the paint so it almost looked like a watercolor. She would often use a grid and divide the spaces, and they end up looking a lot like quilts. So we are going to today do some watercolor, and I'm using the same thing I use with my kids at school, a set of Prang because it has pretty good pigments. And I do have some inexpensive watercolor paper. It happens to be a Canson pad that we use with the kids a lot. You could try it on cardstock. So the very first thing we're going to do is divide the space by creating a border. She used a lot of borders. Sometimes she interrupted them, and sometimes she just would go all the way around. And I'm going to use a blue tape that is a painter's tape that will block out the watercolor if you push it down. You can use masking tape, just be sure and get it off pretty quickly, or you will never get it off the piece. So I'm just putting some, this happens to be a thinner one. I have a thicker one, but I'm just going to put a border all the way around today, so this is going to end up looking more like a quilt. Nothing fancy, just push it down. I could leave that little piece out, but. And then I'm going to decide whether I want to border it some more with some of the tape. And my thicker tape really was a little thick to use for this, but we can make some lines go across so it starts looking a little bit more like a quilt. And the other way I could do, you could do a grid, you could make shapes going across different ways. It's kind of up to you. It's all your creation. The techniques we're going to learn today for textures, watercolor artists also use in landscapes and still lifes and other things. So I'm going to start just like that. And then on my supply list, you'll find it says a piece of candle. I happen to have these household candles. And this is something I know my kids like a lot because we talk about what's going to happen when we put the watercolor over it if we draw something. You can use a white crayon if you don't have anything else. So I'm just going to draw some other shapes on there. And it's going to be hard to see. I'm pushing down pretty hard. I'm in the middle section right now. I think I'm going to draw some other textures or lines some other way. So we're using a mark of a line in some parts. And once we get that done, we're going to start with the watercolor. We're going to decide what colors we want. So you're going to see what happens to the wax. This is a brush like you probably get in your set. It's pretty small. If you want a bigger one, you can, and you happen to be at an art supply store, you can usually find some really inexpensive, soft, round brushes or flat brushes. So I'll take a color that shows real well so you can see what's happening. So the wax forms what's called a resist because wax and water don't mix. And you start seeing your lines almost like magic. I don't remember where else I put it. One of the fun things about watercolor is you can start going in once you wash your brush on top and mixing the color as with it and seeing what happens as you layer it, or you can let it dry and you can move it around like this. So we're going to start texturing right away. We can go always add to this, but I want to make sure we have enough time. So while it is wet, I'm going to take a, I guess we'll use the salt first. So this is just, I happen to use kosher salt because it makes big marks, but this is just some kosher salt. You can use regular. I poured way too much out. I'm going to sprinkle it in where it is wet, and then we're going to just let it dry. Don't touch that area till it's dry again, because otherwise it won't do its magic. It has to be wet to do this. Okay, let me dump that salt over there out of the way. And then we're going to put some more paint down so that we have some other areas to work with. There's another wax design. If you notice, well, actually I do have black in this tray. Usually I don't have black in my trays because when I'm at schools, we make mud when we use black. So I leave that out. Okay, so another way to make texture, and this you need to be with an adult to do, is to take, I seem to have, there it is, to take a little teeny bit of alcohol. And I sometimes do this for the kids because otherwise it gets all over where we don't want it. And I just put some in this little cup. And I'm going to use an eyedropper. And I'm going to drop it into the wet. And you can already see, I think, what it does. It makes these funny little dots with rims on it. Oops. But it has to be wet because I hit a spot down there that wasn't wet enough and it didn't do anything. My kids usually love to do this. It has something to do with chemicals and weight. A science teacher told me that. So we're going to do another one where it also needs to be wet, and that's where the saran wrap comes in. And it's a lot of fun because you can do a whole sheet of paper with this and then paint on top of it. So I'm going to stick some more color down. I like bright colors. I haven't used any red. What does red and blue make? Anybody know? We'll be doing that in another lesson. All right, I think I have some areas that'll work. I'm going to take some saran wrap, lay it down on the wet, and then squish it so it makes lines. And then I'm just going to let it stay there till it dries enough so the lines will be in there like that. So since I'm moving pretty quickly because I want to make sure we get everything in and see what happens. I had down a credit card. Well, what a credit card will do if the paint is wet was it can draw you some lines into the paint like this to get more lines, or you can get some paint on it, which is hard to do with a set of prangs unless we put some on the other side and just wet it. And then you can draw lines into the drier areas. Whoops, gotta get a lot of paint on there to do that. This was something I learned to do in a class where we were trying to do straight lines in a landscape. Oops. So I'm getting all kinds of lines. So let's see. That didn't dry yet, and I'm picking it up. All right. We've got lots of area down here that doesn't have much of anything. This can work with a stiff paintbrush, but if you have any old toothbrushes at home, this is a splatter. I'm going to wet the toothbrush and dip it into a color that'll show. I'm going to use red. And then I'm just going to have fun splattering wherever it'll go. It gets all over my finger, so if you don't want that, you better wear a glove. Come on, splatter. There we go. And that produces a lot of little marks. And it's lots of fun to do. If you're worried about getting it all over, you can put when they're splattering, you could put it inside like a old box or cover your table, which you should do anyway. Okay, so now I've got it looking like kind of like that. I'm going to try one more thing before we try to take the tape off. For one thing, I still have some white spaces I haven't covered. So I think I'm going to draw some more texture in there. And now I've lost my thread of thoughts, sorry. Oh yeah, sponge. Okay, so this is just a regular kitchen sponge. I'm going to dip some of it in there and see if we can get the sponge marks somewhere. It probably won't show if it's too wet, but if it's started to dry already, you can stamp it. I guess I'm going to put a little more saran wrap down here where it's really wet. Okay, so this is where I'm at right now. I'm going to do one more thing before I take the tape off, because I told you that you could layer watercolor. I'm going to see if I have a spot dry enough. Like over here, it's fairly dry to put another color on top. So that is kind of green, bluish green. It's kind of thick. Should probably be thinned out more. I don't think that was quite dry enough because it's kind of getting a little muddy, but you can run it like this, up and down. And even that makes a different pattern if you'll let it dry. Whoops. Ideally, I should have waited to let this all dry probably before taking off the tape, but we're going to take it off now so that we have time to see what happens. So very gently, I'm going to pull off some of the tape. Oops, that piece was on top of the other piece. And you're going to see that we have this nice white border that we can decide what we want to do with that. So the blue tape comes off really easily. It's meant for painting, for like house painters and other people who want to get a straight border somewhere. I had some, oh, it tore the paper a little bit, I think because it's still wet. But if we had more time and let it dry, it would not tear the paper. Yeah, it's tearing the paper. Or if I had taken a hairdryer and dried it for us, we wouldn't have it tearing the paper like that. And I may have pulled just a little too hard. Okay. I've got all but the middle one off, and that one actually had the saran wrap. Okay, so my saran wrap got taken off a little soon. I'm going to put it back on because it's not doing a whole lot. Or I'll just leave that other piece on for you to see. Okay, I've smeared into my border, but my idea was originally not to leave the border all white anyway, to make some more patterns and paint it in the borders. And that might be a good place to try putting some saran wraps again, since I'm not going to touch it. So sometimes this is the only place I would think that you might like black or a darker color to set off all those colors and patterns. You can also make black with blue and brown, and you'll get a really dark gray that is almost black. That's what that is. And it looks almost the same as the black. Yeah, let's try taking some of that saran wrap and putting it there since it's wet on the border, and see if we can get a little crunchy patterns on the border. No, I'm doing it well with time. So you want to just have a lot of fun with this. In the summer program, we usually have children first grade through 5th grade. And we do all kinds of different things based on whatever shows we're looking at. And watercolor is pretty good to work with if you get something that has nice color, like the cranes do. If you start using one that is really inexpensive, like the little dollar sets, they won't have much pigment in them that makes the color. So instead of splattering with the brush, I'm just kind of making, the toothbrush, I'm just kind of making some textures for and lines with it. Trying something different. Okay, I'm hoping I'm going to be able to take the salt off so you can see what it did. But it's not quite dry either. But what the salt will do is it makes these little speckles, almost like snowdrops. In fact, I can show you on this one, on the finished one, the little speckles over here, that is what the salt did. The saran wrap, I'm not sure it's so evident on this one, but it has the alcohols on the bottom. The saran wrap is probably this texture up here where it's all crushed together back and forth. I used saran wrap in a landscape to make mountains and other things look like they have rocks surfaces. So I could keep going, but we're going to kind of run out of time in a minute. And if I don't like this, I could start another one. The other thing is, if you come out with something you don't like, you could always cut it up later and use it in a collage for other work, for some kind of other artwork. So don't throw out things always that you don't think came out the way you thought it should. I have lots of stuff at my house stacked up. Okay, so I'm just going to leave this now. I'm going to just show you what I would use when I'm painting my own. This is a paint tray. I have 3 or 4 of these. I use some tube paint, and I have brushes. Some of them are very inexpensive. This is called a flat watercolor brush, or it's a little bit curved. It's not totally flat. And I think this was like a $4 brush. So watercolor brushes are usually soft. And then tempera brushes and oil brushes are stiffer because of the way they hold the paint. So I hope you're having fun and try this out. And I hope you'll join us next week when we do a very simple printmaking using a styrofoam plate and some Crayola markers or other markers that are water-based. And the third week, when we're going to make Play-Doh and then make sculptures out of our Play-Doh. So we'll be mixing color and we'll be making all kinds of wonderful sculptures. And I think we have a few more minutes. I'm going to see if I can take off some of this. Well, it's still wet, but you can kind of see the texture coming in there. It should really be left till it's dry. Maybe next week, if you show up, I can show you the finished product from this one with it all dry and what's happened. So this is where I'm at right now. It looks kind of messy, but I think it'll be interesting. So come back next week and look up the artwork. Look up Rebecca Morris's artwork on the website of the Blaffer and have fun.